Welcome back, parents. Listen, today we're going to talk about discipline. And if you'd like to know how to discipline in a way that is kind and firm at the same time, also helps your child feel a sense of belonging and significance, is effective long term, and teaches valuable social and life skills for good character. This is the Families of Character show. But also invites your child to discover how capable they are and to use their personal power in constructive ways. You are going to want to stay tuned until the end of this episode. Today, we have an expert on positive discipline on our show. So, welcome to the Families of Character show, Chip DeLorenzo.
Thank you so much for having me, Jordan. It's a pleasure to be here.
So glad to have you on the show. Guys, Chip has been a Montessori educator since 1995. He's also the father of 5 Montessori children, and he and his wife, Kathy, live in Loveland, Ohio. Good Midwesterner. I love it. He's the co author with Jane Nelson of Positive Discipline in the Montessori Classroom, a book they wrote together. And as a teacher trainer and school consultant, Chip has worked with thousands of Montessori teachers and parents in teaching the principles and practices of positive discipline. And he's done that through workshops and various lectures. He is the former head of school at the Damariscotta Montessori School, where he spent 20 years as a teacher and administrator. And Chip holds early childhood, lower and upper elementary AMS certifications and has worked extensively with Montessori adolescent students. Woo! Adolescence. I love it. And positive discipline. This is so good, Chip. So tell us, how did you first become interested in positive discipline? This was before you even had children, it looks like.
Well, by mistake, actually. So I say that with quotation marks around it. So probably like the best things that happened to us, it wasn't my plan. So I actually ran into positive Jane Nelson's work because I was underwater in the classroom. I was a brand new teacher, and like a lot of us who go into teaching, I felt somewhat prepared with the Montessori curriculum and, what I was supposed to be doing. I was not, however, prepared for the behavior difficulties and challenges that I met in the classroom. And to be honest with you, the principles we're going to talk about today, I didn't grow up with those principles, and I had an idea of the person that I wanted to be, the teacher that I wanted to be, but I was underwater almost immediately. And to make a long story short, I had a really caring, kind and firm mentor, boss, who one day, after a particularly challenging situation with one of the students, she put her arm around me and said, "Chip, I don't know how to say this, but you're inviting a lot of the misbehavior that's happening in your classroom."
Oh,
And it kind of stung, but it was also, it's one of those things that somebody tells you, a mentor tells you, and you don't have time to think about it, and it kind of bypasses that filter that sits on top of our shoulders and hits you right in the heart.
hmm
And I knew it was true, Jordan, because she used to come into my classroom and take over for me from time to time, or to work with me. And when she did, it seemed like what she was doing when I wasn't looking is sprinkling magic dust on the kids. And because they started to do all these strange things, like they'd raise their hands when they wanted to speak in a lesson, and they would do their work. They would speak to her respectfully. They would take responsibility for the things they were responsible for in the classroom. And then she left, go back to her office, and she always took her magic dust with her. And
oh,
so the kids stopped doing all those things, right? And so it doesn't take a rocket scientist, to come up with the equation of, like, obviously it wasn't the children and their abilities, because they were exhibiting those abilities for pro-social behavior, and, good stewards in the community when she was there, but then she left. So there was only one shift in that variable, right? I was the
yes.
adult in charge. So anyway, to make a long story short, she recommended some of Jane's work, and before I knew it, I was up attending a workshop in Sacramento, and What happened for me was I think it was almost miraculous. That's what it felt. Because when I got back into the classroom after this workshop, in about 6 weeks, my relationship with the kids changed.
Mm,
Um, and I think that's really the true test of any discipline method that we use is what does that look like in terms of our relationship with the children. And I think I improved about 100% in that 6 weeks. Now, that's not saying a lot. On a scale of 1 to 10, I was at a 1 and I went to a 2, right? So I had a long way to go. But when you're at a 1 and you go to a 2, you really feel it because you're desperate. And that's
yes.
where I was. I was desperate, like a lot of parents and teachers are. And I, what happened is that I started to become more skilled. As a matter of fact, over some time, it actually became a strength of mine, classroom management and discipline and building strong relationships with the students that were appropriate. Like, so I could still be the adult and they were still kids, but
Mm,
we had a strong relationship. I was still the authority and the leader in the classroom. But there was a sense of dignity and respect that permeated the environment. And so little by slowly, I started doing some work with other teachers, and then a bunch of years later, Jane and I wrote this book, and that's kind of how this all came to be. And I'll also just share with you that we're here to talk about parents, and so that was my journey as an educator. So, in all of that, almost 30 years of working in school, around I don't know, about 7, 8 years into being a teacher, I had my own children. And I will say this to all the parents: it's way easier working with your children than it is my own. And so I had all this understanding, this knowledge how to work with other people's children. Uh, but then having your own is a completely different experience. I used to judge the parents, as a teacher, like, oh my gosh, I'll never do this or I'll never do that. And I know we all parents do that before we have kids, right? You see somebody
yes.
with a kid melting down on the playground, and oh my gosh, my kid will never do that until it's our own child, and so it was a whole new journey being a parent because my children had direct access to the things that make up everything in my heart and all my hopes and dreams for them, my ambitions, uh, and so there's a whole new learning process that went along with that. The principles were still there, but my role had shifted. My role had changed.
I appreciate you just saying that from a teacher's perspective, that it's so much easier to, teach another person's child because I hear people saying that all the time. Like, I tried homeschool and I couldn't do it. My kids just don't listen to me like they listen to their teacher. This is so hard. Well, I think it's important for parents to just kind of take that in and realize, like, yes, even educators who are highly skilled at positive discipline, like, have a bit of a hard time applying that to their own children. It's not impossible and it certainly works, but there's a shift when it's someone else's children versus your own. So thanks for just validating that. That feels good.
Sure. Well, and if you're if you're a parent and you haven't been an educator before, just so you know the inner workings of the school environment, some of the kids who are the biggest behavioral challenges happen to be staff children. So it's not easy for the kids either.
Yes. Great. I'm glad to know that. Okay.
So yeah, it's been a journey. And the good news is that these principles that we're going to talk about today, Jordan, they apply at home, and hopefully we leave today and parents have a good sense, a beginning sense on how to implement some of those principles.
Absolutely. Well, tell us, how is positive discipline different for from, I guess, kind of discipline that most people are used to, which I would say, being a counselor and a parent myself, are, giving a consequence, grounding someone, taking something away from someone. So maybe we could just start with that, kind of defining positive discipline and how it's different.
So what struck me initially when I was sitting in that first workshop that I took was that the facilitator started out really introducing the principles that were the underpinning of all of the tools. And So many times as a teacher, as a parent, we're looking for the right tool or the right trick to be able to, to handle a behavior or a situation. One of the things that really, struck home for me is that she started talking about the principles that really drove the tools of positive discipline. And that made sense to the way that I thought, both as a Montessori educator and just as a person in general. And so, my wife and I were just, we were working recently on our schedule. And we just finished off a year where it was just, I'm sure many people identify with this, we just flat out and we don't want to be there. Right? So before we started talking about solutions, the first thing that we
Yes.
did is we started talking about the values and the principles that we have around time. What do we want our home to look like around time? And there's a really logical place to start, because a lot of times in a marriage or working with kids, a lot of times the difficulties we have around competing priorities, right? And so because we know that whether you're in school or marriage and relationship with kids, we're going to have competing priorities. So what are the principles that we're going to follow that are going to guide that behavior, and how we solve problems? So some of the principles of positive discipline that guide, the philosophy that guides the tools that come out of that are, first and foremost, is that understanding that children's behavior is generally goal oriented, right? Back in the 70s, I think
Mm.
it was Dr. Spock was talking about everything was around attention, right? The reason that children misbehave is because they're seeking attention. And that is one of their goals, but there are other goals that children have. And what Rudolf Dreicher said, he was one of the founders of this work, that was a misbehaving child is a discouraged child. And what they're discouraged in is that we all
Mm.
have the principle that that I think fits all of us, is that we all have a deep, social and emotional, as well as in the school environment, belonging and significance, a sense of connection with others, so, family, communities. But children are born with social skills. So they seek out that, not attention,
Mhm.
but, they seek out that connection or that belonging and significance in a variety of ways. And a lot of times those ways are, they're not effective. Right? They're not, so, let's say we use that example of attention. Well, there's a meme that floats around that says, the children really desire connection, but they'll settle for attention. Right?
Children desire connection, but they'll settle for attention. I love that.
And
Okay.
there's a few other, so that would be what we call a mistaken goal. So it's a mistaken idea about what that the child has about how to find that sense of belonging and significance. And that's that's where misbehavior comes from our perspective in positive discipline. So what can happen is that in um, acting forth from that mistaken idea of what they need to do to find belonging and significance, they often are met with resistance or rejection in some sense or form. So an adult gets
Mhm.
upset with them, their peers push back, and they become discouraged. And they're developing human beings. Children don't they don't have the same cognitive skills or social skills that we have. And so they're not going home at night thinking, "Gosh, I tried to play with my friends, and I just kind of shoved my way into that situation. They got mad at me. Tomorrow, I'm going to go try to ask respectfully." Right?
Right.
They actually tend to, because they're operating from a mistaken belief, they tend to redouble their efforts when they're discouraged, rather than change up their game plan. And so
Oh, yes.
So, and then what happens is they enter into a misbehavior cycle, right? So I'm looking for belonging significance. If I don't know how to get it in an effective way, I operate from a mistaken belief. I tend to get resistance. I get discouraged, and I double down, and the cycle kind of continues. So when I first heard that principle, it made a lot of sense to me, because I always sensed that children were looking for something. There was a need, something deep inside of them, um, that they were looking for to have met, um, and through misbehavior. But without understanding what it really was difficult to try to navigate. The other principle is that that effective discipline is it allows everybody to maintain a sense of dignity and respect, both
Mm,
the adult and children. So we kick around the word equality a lot. And when we talk about children, what we mean by that is that everybody deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, the adults and the children, with the understanding that children are still developing, right? So they still need, even though we want to treat them with dignity and respect, they still need leadership and guidance, and education and direct teaching. Uh, but they also need to be respected for how capable they can be, right?
mm.
And
Yes.
so that's a big part of what we do is that as you mentioned, effective discipline it should be kind and firm at the same time, and in a way that upholds the dignity and respect for everybody involved in a situation. Now, what's the other thing that I just wanted to mention is, and this one really stuck with me, but I didn't know how to implement it, and that is that with this idea of dignity and respect, we look at the children if we understand that they're going to make mistakes as they develop and as they grow socially. It is messy business.
Mhm.
You're part of a family. I mean, we have conflict, we have different perceptions, different priorities, and we learn to work together as a unit, hopefully. Um, but it usually happens, the greatest growth usually happens through the mistakes that we make, right? And the blunders that we make and repairing those.
Yes.
So looking at children's misbehavior as a mistake, that is really an opportunity for them to learn. Um, I think is a really critical piece of this work. And so that as we implement some of the tools that we'll talk about in a bit, treating those misbehaviors as a mistake, not with being permissive, but just as a mistake that there's a growth opportunity here. How can we help facilitate that growth? Because we know that the child is really just looking to find a sense of belonging and significance. And it's our responsibility to help them to get there in a way that's effective and that's going to be respectful to the people around them. Yeah.
This is great. I'm making a few notes because I think it's so important, and I wanna just echo what you said about treating misbehaviors as a mistake and as a learning opportunity, because as you actually said that and I was listening closely, I noticed just in my own body, just like my shoulders kinda melt down and have more of a softness, just internally, just even considering that a child's misbehavior is a mistake, right? It comes from a mistaken belief. And like you said, if they're doubling down and going, full blast into this behavior, it's not because they're trying to upset their friends. They've got something against you, the parent or the teacher, and they're just really trying to get back at you. I mean, this is not personal. This is them just learning and growing and trying new things on, and it's an opportunity for growth. So I think the mindset around it as a parent, just being willing to consider that the misbehavior is a mistake and an opportunity for growth, and we should expect lots of those from our kids because they are still growing and developing. I think that alone can shift how we approach discipline in that scenario.
Yeah, and just adjusting what our expectations are. Like
Yes.
I had a colleague say one time, that children have just made a statement. Children have different priorities than adults do, and I had that same experience. Like, yeah, yeah, it would be strange if they had the same priorities. Like we would probably be worried if our kids came home at the end and say, Mom, can we hold off on dinner for about a half hour? I've got a ton of homework to do. I want to get it done, and I really want to make sure my room is clean and my chores are done, so that I can just relax at dinner and really enjoy our company. Right? And that would be strange,
Right.
right? We would think, "What happened? I think I need they need some help." Right? Um,
Yes.
so kids have different priorities than we do as well. And just knowing that was like, oh wow, that makes a lot of sense. As a matter of fact, sometimes we can learn a lot from their priorities, and maybe we should adopt some of them.
True. Absolutely true. Great. Okay, so I heard you talk about kind and firm at the same time, respecting and the dignity of the human person, and the fact that this child is growing and developing, and Um, maybe talk a little bit to that. Um, I've heard a lot of parents, and in particular fathers, just say, well, they need to respect me. I am the authority and we're not friends. So there's nothing about this relationship that puts us on the same plane. And so I'm really afraid that like using some of these techniques will seem like to my child that I'm their friend and that they will lose respect for me from a place of authority. So I don't know. What
Well,
does
it's a
that bring
great
up for you?
point. Yeah, and there's actually some validity to that. But first of all, I would say, yeah, our positional authority is important. Children need that. They don't feel safe without limits and guidance and structure. One of the things that Dana and I have talked about this before. So, one of the problems with the title "positive discipline" is it's really misunderstood. When people hear it, they perseverate on one of those two words, either positive or discipline. And when they're perseverating on the idea of positivity, they're thinking of just, usually what comes to mind is permissiveness. And if I'm just, nice and give lots of praise and some rewards, that hopefully my child will behave like maybe like a dog, right? And then discipline is associated with, being authoritarian, and it's my way or the highway, and you need to get on board. But the truth is that the root word, the Latin root from discipline, means to teach and to learn, right? And so
Mm.
discipline in and of itself is positive, right? Well, we need that. And Dr. Montessori, Montessorian, is one of her foundational principles is that children need freedom, but within limits, right? So they need to learn to
Yes.
navigate the world around them and have the freedom to make mistakes. So they build things like resilience and confidence and a sense of capability. But if those limits are too wide, they're going to get hurt, right? They're not. They're actually. They may shut down, or they may be completely undisciplined internally. So they need limits so that they can grow and make those choices safely and experience the consequences of their behavior, both positive and negative, in a way that builds their own self-discipline and their own self-regulation and an internal motivation rather than it being fully external. And uh, there's, it's a confusing culture right now to be a parent, and it has been for a while.
Yes.
When I was growing up, in '58 in November. So I grew up in the late '60s and throughout the '70s, and there was a shift that was happening then from a much more authoritarian culture to a much more permissive one. In my elementary school, we had two wings. One was built first, and it was tile floors, cement walls, desks in rows, chalkboard at the front. The other new wing that was built in the
Okay.
'70s had carpet, didn't have real walls. They had dividers. Yeah, they were a lot of chalkboards. We were all sitting around in circles, right? It was like in the same
Mm.
school, right?
Yes.
And it's really like what I remember about being in the first the desk and row side was is that I felt very confined and it felt cold and authoritarian. All the hippie teachers were in the in the other wing, and it felt a little too loosey goosey, like I wasn't learning a lot, and it was loud because there weren't any walls, right?
Okay. Yes.
So it
Yes.
was
The
hard to
pendulum
learn,
always swings so far to the
right?
other side. It seems like it doesn't drop in the middle too often.
Right. And with parenting, that's one of the things that happened. It was, in some ways, it was probably easier in the '50s and '60s and before in a more authoritarian culture because a lot of people were doing the same thing, right? And I remember growing up, it wasn't uncommon for one of my friend's parents to discipline me, right?
Hmm.
And it was usually authoritarian. It was, top down, definitely. And a lot of us who are older remember that if we got in trouble from one of our friends' parents, then it would be my parents would ask me, "What did I do?" And not yell at the other parent. Well, that's gone completely the other way. But it's confusing because there are books like ours, and there are many other books that are out there that different gentle parenting now, and so everybody there's all these parents. Everybody's trying to do the right thing, but unfortunately, what happened is the pendulum has swung, And we've gone from a top, a vertical approach where it's top down with adult here, children down here, in an attempt to find, and I think all of the attempt is to find a sense of dignity and respect for everybody. But in that shift, we've gone a little too far.
Hmm.
And in many cases, it's still a vertical environment, but the child's on top and the adult's on the bottom.
Yes.
And you can hear it in conversations. I've done it myself where you think, no, where do you want to go for dinner tonight? My parents would have never asked me that question.
Right. Yes.
And so children are mini adults. So we can't, from the authoritarian perspective, the parent is asking the child to be an adult and have all the responsibility of an adult. With a permissive, approach, the adult is putting, the child in charge and having all those abilities. And both of them are not great for kids, right?
Yes.
So the idea of discipline is that it's both kind. So we want to be warm, connected, accepting, supportive, but also firm with clear and appropriate boundaries, um, and have the adults still be the adults. We're not friends with the children. We may be friendly, we may be warm and connected, but it's an adult-child relationship, not a child-child relationship.
Yes. Thank you for clarifying that. And I agree with you that the pendulum is swung and out of a place of wanting to respect, you know, the dignity of the other person, but oftentimes we just go the opposite of what, didn't work. And so
Right?
it
Yeah.
sounds like this, positive discipline lands right there in the middle. It's kind of, both where like you're talking about having boundaries, having guardrails around the relationship and the child clearly knows what is expected but also has the freedom because they're loved and their parent is being warm to them and not shaming them if they've made a mistake or behaved in a way that, didn't get them the outcome they wanted, then they still have the freedom to make those mistakes within the boundaries of that relationship and feel like this is okay, this is acceptable.
And the idea of kind and firm, the phrase after that is critical, which is at the same time. So I can be kind with my kids. I can be firm with them. Doing them at the same time, especially if I'm under some stress, might be a little difficult. Right? And so we want to be careful of one of the pitfalls that we fall into as adults. Sometimes is we do a bit of a dance, right? So when I'm under stress, guess what? I tend to misbehave.
Sure.
So for me personally, where I tend to go when I'm misbehaving, I actually tend to become more authoritarian. It's my way, the highway, get in the car now. I joke around and say, if I'm rushing everybody out the door and trying to go to school and then 5 minutes late and I'm going to sound a little bit like this. Get in the car now. Five, four, three. I don't care. You're Montessori kids. You should be independent. Get in the car now. These are natural consequences, right?
Right.
If I, if I had a bumper sticker, it would read, you're not parenting if no one's crying. You
Oh
know?
my, yeah, yes.
But I'm not a sociopath. So then what happens is later on, I'm not liking myself too much in my behavior. So I kind of feel guilty. So then I flip to the other side and become, let's forget about the rules. I know chores, I can wait till tomorrow. Let's go out for dinner for ice cream. I'm sorry about my behavior. And then by the end of the day, I don't like them very much. I'm back down to the authoritarian side. And that can happen internally. It can also happen between two parents, right?
Mm, yes.
So if I'm being more permissive, guess where my wife is going to? I'm going to push my wife.
Way over to the friendly side.
Yeah.
Yes.
So if I'm authoritarian, she becomes permissive. She's permissive. I start overcompensating, become authoritarian. And that inconsistency is, well, it's not helpful for the kids because they can't predict. The environment becomes unpredictable.
Yes, and when a child's in an environment where it's unpredictable, they are in kind of fight or flight mode all the time. They're on the
Right.
edge, right? They have that sense of heightened anxiety where they're trying to predict what's going to happen to gain some control or mastery over the environment, and it's very stressful for them. So I think, yeah, I can totally agree with you on that flipping from one end of the spectrum to the other to try to kind of make up for whatever mistake you made in your behavior, and
Yeah.
then getting in this cycle yourself of misbehavior as
Yeah.
a
And then when
parent.
the adults are misbehaving, the kids are misbehaving, nobody's having any fun. Yeah, so.
Nobody. Yes. Well, what gets in the way of people going from kind of a traditional authoritarian based parenting to this positive discipline? Like, what do you hear parents most often say, or even teachers that are a little bit resistant at first? What are some of the barriers to kind of crossing over and adopting this new style?
Well, that's a great question. The first thing is we've already talked about, which is a misunderstanding about what positive discipline is. Is that I think a lot of times there's a misconception that it might be permissive, right? And a lot of times people are coming to a workshop, they're coming to find out about this work because they're having difficulties and they don't want to be permissive, right?
Yes.
So I think first of all, understanding that in looking at positive discipline, that it advocates both kindness and firmness at the same time.
Hmm.
The other thing is that I think a lot of times our own experience, and you mentioned that our reaction, if there's some things that that didn't work for us as kids, we just flip the other side of the same coin. So if I have and I grew up in a family, my parents divorced when I was about 3. My dad was definitely a product of the 50s, much more authoritarian, top down, my way, the highway. You know, if you get C's, you're grounded for every day that you have a C, so you just stay and do your homework. My mother never looked at my report card. She was a hippie from the 60s, you know what I mean? And so it was a lot of dichotomy in the way that I was raised. So when I had my own kids, or even when I went to the classroom, they were unconscious uh, principles that I had adopted because I said, okay, I'm never going to do this. But the problem is I didn't have a replacement behavior, right?
Oh, yes. Right.
And so if I say I'm not going to yell at the kids and then they misbehave and I don't have something to do instead, what happens a lot of times as adults, if I don't have something to do instead, is it creates even more stress. So I'm stressed in the first place because I'm seeing some misbehavior. I don't know how to deal with it. I know what I don't want to do, so I try not to do it. So if I'm trying not to yell at them, maybe I try to be overly compassionate. And then now I'm inviting and facilitating manipulation into kids, right? And then I get really
Yes.
stressed, and I just wind up yelling at them, right? And so then what happens is you get into your own cycle, which is now I'm going to beat myself up because I just did what I said I wasn't going to do. And then for me, my only choice is either to rationalize what I did or to beat myself up, further. And neither one of them are going to be productive to my relationship building with the kids. So um, understanding that just we do it with toddlers, right? One of the most important tools to use with a toddler, and I think as grown ups sometimes we're just big toddlers,
Yes.
is we teach them. We don't say no, don't do this. We show them what to do instead. We teach them what to do versus what not to do. I think effective teaching and leading, it's always showing what the person what to do versus what necessarily what not to do, right?
Hmm.
So when I
Yes.
started having some ways some tools, something to do instead, so I didn't misbehave myself, I tell you, it lowered my stress level. Even if the tool that I used wasn't that effective, it was way better than what I was about to do. Right.
Yes.
so
Yes.
so I think to go back to your question and answer it directly and succinctly. Um, as people look at this work, if they're trepidatious, understand that it's based on some principles that I think most people really agree with, right? Uh,
Yes.
and we talked about some of those, and that it's about helping us to live out those principles, and showing us what to do, rather than just a lecture on don't do this, avoid this, avoid that.
Thank you for just saying that it's so important to have, the positive option at your fingertips and to think through that. If you decide, I'm not going to yell at my kids, or I'm never going to ground them or just snatch their cell phone away from them. Okay, what are you going to do instead? Right? Having that replacement discipline at your fingertips and having practiced doing that a few times is how are you going to calm your own frustration or irritation internally in order to deliver positive discipline to your child where you're kind and firm, and maybe there is a consequence that's attached to it, but you're not doing the thing you didn't want to do. That's just huge that you have to have what you're going to do ready.
And that's really, I mean, if you were to wrap up, I think Jane would be jumping up and down if I said this, because I think it's one of her favorite um, phrases in positive discipline that we use, and that is that the focus is more on with the kids and with us is focusing on solutions rather than on plans.
Yes.
And so even with my wife, when we were talking about our schedule lately, the focus was is okay. So we both have some frustrations. We both have some challenge, some priorities that are important to us. That's great. Let's acknowledge those. But how are we gonna figure it out?
Mm.
What's the solution to those problems versus getting into a place of blame, which tends to erode the relationship and actually exacerbate the problem. Even if we're right, right? Even if we have the right information or the right answer, if it's filled with criticism or blame, it tends to, kids, children, adults, we tend to respond the same to that. So
Yes.
focusing on solutions.
I like that because it's a team mentality as well. It's like, okay, what outcome are you going for? And how is it that I can help you to get the outcome that you want if that outcome is something that's acceptable, right? Yeah. Let me put you on the spot here for a minute. Okay, so you gave the example of kind of how you handle the in the morning, we're running 5 minutes late to school and your blood pressure's going. You said what, you would do if you got upset and just kind of lost it, and then you come back and make up for it by, telling them later you're going to take them out to dinner and ice cream.
Right.
Same scenario, okay? Using positive discipline. How would you go about addressing the fact that your kids are running late and you got to get going?
So there, for the sake of time, what I'll do is I'll kind of give an example of one tool because there are many tools. One of the things that adults we're always looking for. We want a matrix, right? Like if you do this, if the child does this, then you do this, and then you do this, and there really is no magic bullet like that. And I'm sure if I told your audience that there was, I would lose all my credibility because we've all
Yes.
tried those things and found them. Maybe they work for a few minutes or for a few days, but they don't generally work for the long term. So one of my favorite tools to use is something we call motivational curiosity questions. Right. So for me, when I'm under stress, what I tend to do is I tend to give a lot of directives. Right?
Yes.
When I do a workshop, I usually tell folks this is the reason I love presenting this is because it's a blind spot for me. It's something I always need to work on. So even when I teach it, it really helps to ingrain it in me. And so in a rush, getting the kids out the door, I might say something like, "Go get your coat on. You need to get your lunch together. I need you to get in the car right now." So what I'm doing is I'm giving directives, really things that the kids already know that they need to do. Right?
Right.
So I'm giving them a lot of reminders, a lot of directives. So what I always ask adults is that when you get a directive or a reminder for something that you already know, how do you respond? What feeling does that generate in you? Are you more likely to cooperate? Um, One of the things, one of the phrases in our sentences in our books is, reminding children of things that they already know is disrespectful.
It is. It totally is. When you said that, how would you respond if someone said something to you that you're I would respond, "I know." And that's what my kids say to me when I tell them that.
Right,
"I know." And then what do I say? I talk back to their back talk. I say, "If you know, then why aren't you doing it?" And then it's just in this back and forth and it's like, "Oh no, I've become the child. The parent has become the child. This is not good."
right. So so rather than give those directives, the child may need some redirection in that moment. So it doesn't mean that they don't need to be redirected. They don't need, if I'm giving a directive, really there's a couple of assumptions that I have, or a reminder is that there's usually the underlying assumption that the child knows what to do, right? Especially if
Yes.
I'm frustrated, and that they know what the expectation is. Um, So that's where I wind up giving the directive. But what it could sound like is this. Well, let me give you a few directives, and then I'll and if your audience just wants to listen and pretend you're a child, you can just feel how this feels for you. Okay,
Okay.
go get on your coat, put your toys away, go clean up your room, put your dishes in the sink. So just take a moment and digest that, how you might be feeling, what decisions you might be making as a result of those feelings. Now I'm going to try something a little bit different. What do you need to do if you don't want to be cold outside? Where can you put your toys so they won't get stepped on and broken? How can you arrange your room so that it's ready for bedtime? Where do your dishes go after
Mm,
we finish dinner? And usually we end those questions with just some what I call presence, warmth, and silence. And it's like the child says, I don't know. I might just give a knowing smile. I'm not going to respond. He's going to say, I know that you know that I know, and
mm,
I trust that you're going to follow through.
that's good.
And that for me, that was a really important tool when I first started doing this work, because I was, when I was in the classroom, I was giving a lot of directives and a lot of reminders, and the kids were responding, as we talked about. It wasn't great.
Yes.
And then I'd complain about the kids that they never listened. And essentially that's what Margaret was saying to me in a fairly kind and firm way, which is, I was inviting a lot of the misbehavior. And she was using tools like this. Like, there's no doubt when I watched her do things like this that she meant business. Like, she wasn't asking those questions permissively. She wasn't giving the child necessarily an option to do something else than what they were supposed to be doing. She was giving a prompt to them. And so rather than stuffing in the information, she was using a question to draw forth, right?
Yes.
So you notice those questions, they all begin with what or how, and they're designed to trigger a response in the children for them to think about what to do or how to do it, rather than whether or not they're going to do it. And the problem with directive is that, it really leaves the directee with two choices, right? So a lot of times I'll ask, how many choices do you have if you get a directive? People say, well, I just have one. I mean, it's not really, right? You have two. You can comply or you can rebel. I
Right.
can do it or not do it. And a lot of times when I'm giving a directive, I'm in a rush or I'm stressed, and I really, just selfishly, I want a better than a 50-50 chance. Right?
Yes. Yes, please.
Now that's just selfishly. Long term, are those the characteristics that I want to cultivate in my kids? So I want to cultivate compliance, or resentment, or rebellion. And honestly, I like cooperation. I'm not really looking for compliance, right?
Mm, yes.
I know hear a lot of employers out there saying, "Gosh, I just wish my employees would be compliant," right?
Ugh,
A lot
that
of
term just gives me the willies. Ugh.
it might be nice in the moment, but it's not going to help your business grow. Yeah, I know it's not going to open up a conversation with somebody giving a suggestion that might improve things. So, and when we ask the questions, the children are focused on what to do or how to do it, and there might be some wiggle room in how they accomplish something, but we're not asking them whether or not they want to do it. Right? There's an
Mhm.
expectation or a limit that we're maintaining in that moment, but we're true to by drawing forth versus stuffing in. And it's interesting. There's some research that shows that when people get directives, their whole body changes, tense up, they start to get in defensive posture. When we're asked questions, we tend to open up and start to go inside and start to think. And that would be an example of being kind and firm at the same time.
Yes. Okay. Again, making notes for myself too, because I do not have it all figured out over here. I am just the host of the show. But directives versus asking motivational curiosity questions. And that's my takeaway so far. That is what I'm holding on to. That's going to be my call to action for myself is instead of giving a firm directive or telling my child what they already know to do, ask a how or you know what
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
question. Yes, I love that. And you're right. The feeling in the body is so different. You're bouncing it back to them for like exploration and kind of like, giving them the benefit of the doubt. You know how this goes. And so get to searching around your mind and be able to tell me the process and then engage in the process and do what it is you need to do.
Sure. Yeah. And another principle just to keep in mind is that these tools that are for follow through and for setting and maintaining limits, they're much more effective if we have a sense of connection before correction, right? And that can happen in the big term. Matter of fact, it just occurred as something I was thinking about this morning before before you and I met, and that is I came downstairs early this morning because I had an early morning meeting to my office, do some work and answer some emails. And I hadn't even gotten a chance to say good morning to my son Peter. And when I went upstairs, I looked out back, and there's little test strips floating in the pool, and it's my son's job to take care of the pool. He's 14, and so I just said something like, I noticed that those test strips are floating in the pool, and he said, "Oh, I'll go grab them." Right, so it was a liquid, but it felt empty to me. I was using a positive discipline tool, which is I was just making my notice statement, which said to him, "I know that you know, right? And thank you." uh,
Yes.
but I didn't even have a chance to say good morning to him.
Mm,
And so even when I used one of these tools, without that sense of connection, I felt actually a little bit of disconnect between he and I.
mhm.
And so a real fundamental principle that we try to encourage is the idea of connection before correction. And if you take in a big picture, like maybe next time I say, what, what's the big deal? The thing floating in the pool. It's not. It's sealed up. I just don't like where it is. And let me say good morning, and I'll come back
Yes.
to that later. Or it could just be something in the moment where I just say, "Hey, I love you very much. Good morning. Good to see you." And hey, I noticed that the things out in the pool. Great. Just take care of that for me. Thanks.
So good. Yes, connection before correction. Again, another great takeaway. And I can relate to that. I tell the story about how I used to be just so rushed all the time, doing everything for everyone, even beyond the years where they could have taken on these responsibilities for themselves. And I would come in the door from work and I would just start barking out orders. I'm tripping over shoes and backpacks and I'm going, pick up your shoes. Has anyone started their homework? And like, that's fun. First, I'm yelling directives and I haven't even connected with them yet, right? I haven't even made a simple greeting like, "Oh, hey guys, it's good to be home. It's good to be home from the office with you.
Yeah.
Man, can we get to
Yeah.
picking up these shoes? You think, where do these shoes go?" Right? Asking the motivational curiosity questions after I've connected.
Right. Well, and we all do that. I mean, it's life is crazy, especially start having a few kids. It's there's never enough time. And I have a 22-year-old, and it goes by fast. It goes
Yes.
by fast, and in 10 years, I'm not going to care about what happened to the shoes, but I am going to care about that. If I missed opportunities for connection.
Yes, and that's where that respect and warmth comes in and making sure that yeah, you are repairing any ruptures that you're making when you
Yeah,
do have a misstep in your discipline or your parenting, right? I talk about that so much. It's so important to repair and to say that we're sorry and ask for forgiveness.
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's and that when we admit our own mistakes, it really frees up the environment for to one of the principles we talked about, which is that mistakes are an opportunity to learn for us too. We've got to make mistakes. When we do, when we take responsibility without blame or excuses, it's amazing. Kids not only do they does it free up the environment, free up them to be able to make mistakes without the worry of blame or shame or humiliation, but they begin to model that.
Mhm.
Uh, with I'll just tell you a quick story. I know we're running out of time, but one of the things, there's directives. That's one of the things that I just naturally and still is something I have to be very mindful for. One of the things that I think I've done well as a parent is been able to admit when I made a mistake.
Mm.
I will tell you, it is much easier to admit when I make a mistake if I have a replacement behavior that I know that I can do, If I don't, it's a lot harder because I don't know that I'm not going to make that mistake again, right? So that's where I think having some tools to use so that we have context for our mistakes and we can actually learn from them is really important. It actually takes a lot of heat off of us because now I say, okay, there is something I can do differently next time. That frees me up to be able to think, hey, listen, Jordan, I snapped at you when I came in this morning, and you didn't deserve that. I would be really upset if you treated me that way, and it was, you must have felt really hurt. Please forgive me. And now I also know that next time I'm going to do something a little bit differently, right?
Yes.
And we've repaired, and I've also modeled. I've watched that with my kids. My son Peter and Teresa, who are the ones. I have 5 children, and Peter and Teresa are the ones that have the most sibling rivalry between them.
Hmm.
One morning a few years ago, we were on our way to school, and Peter was just, at least from my perspective, I didn't hear the whole thing, but it sounded like Peter was just giving Teresa a really hard time. And I know I've been doing the parenting thing now long enough to know that I should stay out of those arguments because I'll just make it worse, right? And so
Okay.
I was trying to practice what I preach, staying out of the argument. Then there was some silence after the back and forth. And a few minutes later, I hear Peter say, Teresa, I wasn't being fair to you. I was being a jerk. Would you please forgive me? And of course, Teresa, being Teresa, said, I'll think about it.
Delayed forgiveness. I'm going to make it hurt for a minute for you, brother.
But those are almost the exact words in the exact way that I would have said something. I wouldn't have said jerk, but it was the same way that I would have said that. And it was really a moment like, wow, they watch and they listen, and so we don't have to be perfect. But to your point, when we repair, there's a lot of healing that takes place, and a lot of connection that opens up the opportunity for future success.
Yes. And again, apologizing and asking for forgiveness does not remove your authority as the parent. It actually elevates you in their mind, right? You rise on the respect meter to them. It's like, wow, mom and dad make mistakes and they're willing to acknowledge them and ask me for forgiveness. Like, that's really cool for a kid, you know?
It's a big deal, and it's not. And it's a hard skill to learn as a parent because when sometimes I'll be in a room with 100 people, and I'll ask how many of you have ever remember an adult making amends with you, and there's usually about 3 or 4 hands that go up, right?
Yes. Oh,
And so a lot of the adults haven't had it modeled for them themselves, and so we walk through the world of parenting thinking that we have to be perfect, or at
mm-hmm.
least be perceived as perfect.
Yeah. No, just allowing yourself, like you said, to make a mistake and understand that that's a growing opportunity for you too, and you're worthy of forgiveness. That's huge. Just accepting that as an adult, that I'm worthy of forgiveness and repair, even if I didn't get it from my own parents. And how can I make sure that I'm modeling that and genuinely kind of implementing that in my own parenting with my kids?
Great point. I'm glad you brought that up.
Good stuff. Chip, thank you for bringing the goodness when it comes to positive discipline and a new way. Again, I think one of the biggest takeaways is make sure you have in your back pocket what you're going to do instead of that one thing that comes to your mind that you just hate when you do it with your kids. Yelling, screaming, cussing, you know, barking out orders or giving them directives when you haven't greeted them or connected with them yet. Think about in your mind, parents, what it is that you want to kind of eradicate from the discipline that you've been doing and the way you've been interacting with your kids. And think of one of these things that Chip has shared with us today, and really challenge yourself to consider changing the way you do things, asking motivational curiosity questions instead of just giving directions, making sure that you're connecting before you're correcting, and then just thinking about the dignity and respect that your kids deserve as they are growing and developing as children and are meant to make these mistakes in order to learn social and emotional cues and how to relate to the world in a positive way. So, Chip, let's talk about how people can find you. Are you on the social media platforms? Which social media platforms can they find Chip DeLorenzo?
So they could find me on Instagram at Chip underscore DeLorenzo, and my website, chipdelorenzo.com, and Facebook, LinkedIn, all the usual. So I usually come right up. So yeah, I'd be happy to see anybody. And then you can, I'd really recommend Jane's original book for parents. That's not something, it's a book, that was the original book she wrote, and it's still my favorite. It's a classic. It's just Positive Discipline by Jane Nelson. It's a wonderful resource. Um, and if you read that with your children as a parent, it's being able to operate at least somewhat off of the same, reading off the same sheet of music is,
Yes.
you know, incredibly helpful, as we all know.
Absolutely. Being a team uh, on the same page as parents is one of the most important things we can do, I think. So that is called Positive Discipline. You can find that at positivediscipline.com, or I'm sure you can find it on Amazon or all the
Mhm.
fun places. Awesome. And then you two did a book together that is called Positive Discipline in the Montessori Classroom as
Yeah,
well.
which is great. If you're a Montessori educator, that's a great book. If you're a parent, you might want to just check out Jane's book. Yeah, so she and I did a book together, and it came out in 2021. So.
Congratulations. What a time to publish a book too. And I'm sure people needed it at that time with COVID going on and everybody flooding into the Montessori schools from public schools. It's like, help us.
Yeah, it was a squirrel. It was a squirrel, that's for sure.
Yes. Awesome. Well, guys, if you want any more kind of education or understanding around the the idea of positive discipline or just the Montessori philosophy and some of the ways that Montessori can influence your parenting at home, we have 3 other podcast episodes. So number 50 of our show is called The 4 Planes of Development. Episode 58 is called Simple Four-Step Lessons That Will Decrease Frustration with Your Kids. You can guarantee there's lots of positive discipline in that one. And then episode 104 called Teaching Children to Share. And all 3 of those episodes, we have a guest, Pauline Meert, from the Sophia Montessori Academy, who was sharing with us on those episodes. They've been very, very popular. So, speaking of Pauline Meert and Sophia Montessori Academy here in Denver, Colorado, Chip is going to be coming to Colorado. If you're listening to this before Sunday, August 4th, you can go to sophiamontessori.com and sign up and come listen to Chip's talk for parents. I will be there. I've already got my ticket. So, Chip, we hope to see you in Denver in August. And thanks again for your guest appearance here on the Families of Character show.
Thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun, and it was an honor. Appreciate it, Jordan.
Awesome. Guys, share this episode with others. Take a minute to just give us a rating and review so that our podcast can reach more and more parents across the globe. Thanks so much, and I'll catch you on another episode of our show real soon. Take care.